Hi, guys. I'm here for another recent interview with Mr. Ben Habib. He was the deputy leader of the Reform Party. He's also a Cambridge graduate. And I've actually interviewed him before. So if you go and check out one of my older videos, I interviewed him when I was working for the Reform Party in communication strategy. And that interview done quite well, actually. And ever since the election, I haven't actually spoken to him. So welcome back to the show, Ben.
Thank you very much, Eunice. Pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.
So basically, I saw you on GB News the other day, and I had this brief conversation with you before you went on air. So just tell me what happened with the Reform Party and Nigel Farage.
You mean vis-a-vis my position?
Yeah, in your position and just your relationship with the party and Nigel Farage.
Yeah, so, speaking absolutely candidly,
Yeah.
um, Nigel and I have a couple of ideological differences.
Okay.
Um, Namely, he thinks Brexit's done, but that the United Kingdom hasn't properly taken advantage of it. I think
Hmm.
Brexit hasn't been done because when we voted to leave the EU, we voted for the United Kingdom to leave, and Northern Ireland is famously left behind. Famously left behind. Its fame is partly down to all the efforts I've been making. Other people have also been making efforts to draw attention to the subject, but I have been fighting that battle ever since we notionally left the EU. And I can't make any case to say Brexit's done while part of the United Kingdom is left behind. And it's just not a matter of the effect it has on Northern Ireland. It's also a matter of the effect it has on Great Britain. And the Northern Ireland Protocol makes it impossible for Great Britain really to do what it wishes to do. But we should obviously act as a United Kingdom because if we're not prepared to stand by our kin in Northern Ireland, what are we as a country? I question our entire moral compass at that point. So we disagree on the fact that Brexit's done, um, and then we have a slight difference on the constitutional makeup of reform.
Hmm.
Before I joined Reform, when Richard invited me, when he was leader, Richard Tice invited me to be to join the party. I said that I would only join if it was democratized, if Nigel gave up the shares, the controlling number of shares that he owns in the company. Viewers may be aware that it's a private limited company. It's got 15 shares. Nigel owns nine of them. Richard owns five, and one is owned by a guy called Mehrtash Azami. And I wanted Nigel to give up those shares because I didn't want, for example, another situation like in 2019 when Nigel decided to stand down 317 candidates in the general election against the Conservative Party without any discussion. So I wanted a more democratized party before I joined it. And Nigel refused. In the end, after protracted discussions, Richard gave me a letter of comfort, which set out a few things, including that the party would be run consensually, we wouldn't stand down against the Tories, and that Brexit's not done and we'll fight for the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that all went well. Richard, stuck to the agreement and the party was run consensually. And other former MEPs who joined at the same time as me, Anne Widdecombe, Alex Phillips, Rupert Lowe, June Mummery, etc., we all
Hmm.
got together on a regular basis and we had meetings. Um, then Nigel appointed himself leader on the 3rd of June. And again, I started saying to Richard, because obviously my letter didn't apply at that point. So I started saying to Richard, look, we've got to democratize the party. And the message seemed to have got home by the end of the general election. On the 5th of July, Nigel made a declaration the day after the general election that he would democratize the party. And then just before the conference, the reform conference in September, um, the draft constitution was revealed. And actually, it was a constitution that had been rejected by me a year and a half ago. And contrary to what Zia Youssef said, which is that it was, the finest legal minds in the country were working on it day and night, they weren't. It was an old document that doesn't do the trick, in my view. But anyway,
Yeah.
so we've got an ideological difference on Brexit, which is pretty fundamental actually, and
Yeah.
we got a constitutional difference on the makeup of the party and the requirement for democracy. And wind the clock on to now, and the party is still majority owned by Nigel, even though he said he'd hand over the shares to the membership, still owned by Nigel. There have been no applications to the Electoral Commission for changing the constitution. So even the constitution that was passed at the conference in September hasn't been put forward to the Electoral Commission, as far as I'm aware, and the ownership of the party hasn't changed. So these are pretty crucial things, and I don't think reform will succeed, frankly, if it doesn't
Right.
democratize, because you can't
Okay.
make the case for the democratic unit that is the United Kingdom and simultaneously not have a democratic party. You know, if you wish to trust the British people to effectively direct its elected representatives in how the country is run, you've got to trust your own membership. You should be trusting them completely. And of course, you need checks and balances to make sure there isn't entryism and the party can't be undermined. But that should be a central tenet. There's one other thing I should mention on an ideological basis. In September 23, Nigel was interviewed by the Irish News, and he said, inevitably one day Northern Ireland will be united with the Republic. And that, and he also said Mary Lou MacDonald was I think a friend of his or something, and Leah Varadkar and him used to sort of, hang out in the European Parliament. Well, I regard the notion of a united Ireland is I can't get my head around it, because Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. I can't get to the position Nigel was at. So we do have fundamental differences on the makeup of the country, the constitutional state of the party, the importance for democracy. And I think that's the underlying difference between Nigel and me.
Right, because I think
Yeah, that
you're
was
actually
very long answer.
no,
Sorry,
but that
forgive
was a
me. Yeah, yeah,
that was a great answer because I want to get to the core of the issue because I actually think you're a
yeah,
charismatic figure, and actually don't play identity politics. I think you're half Pakistani. I'm a quarter Pakistani, and we both don't play identity politics. We don't fall into this trap
yeah,
of virtue signaling and wokeism, and that's why I think your word has a lot more weight. So when someone like you comes and speaks, I think it lands with the listeners. And I think the Reform Party made a strategic mistake. What's your position in the party right now? You're not deputy leader anymore, so do you have any official position with the Reform
well,
Party?
no one, I mean, this is part of the
Yeah,
point. It's
yeah,
not just the democratization of the party. There's no shadow cabinet. Five months on, there's no shadow
yeah,
cabinet. How is the party going to win a general election if it doesn't have a broad body of people that are capable, articulate, know what they're talking about, and can fight for the specific issues the party wishes to fight for? You need it, right? And
yeah.
I don't see anyone. So no one's got a position. No one's got a
Okay,
position.
so you're just a member of the party, or you don't have an
Well,
official
Nigel
position?
says I'm not a member. Nigel has said to
Oh,
Channel 4 News that I'm not a member. I never resigned my membership. So if I'm not a member, it's because I was never a member. Even when I was deputy leader, I wouldn't therefore have been a member. So, I mean, it's all a bit academic.
yeah.
For me,
So
what matters, Eunice, for me, what
yeah,
matters is the movement
yeah,
that reform is created, making sure that that movement stays intact, that the promises made by reform to the movement are delivered, and that reform morphs itself into a party which is capable of governing the country. These are big
yeah.
hurdles, and they require big steps. And I see no steps coming out of the leadership of Reform UK at the moment.
So would you say there is any bad blood between you and Nigel?
There's no bad blood. It's not about me or Nigel, is it? I mean,
Yeah.
what I just have a view that it should be democratized. We should deliver on the promises, and we need a shadow cabinet. If
Yeah.
Nigel is serious about winning the 2029 general election, I can't see how he could have any disagreement with that. He should be
Okay. Yeah.
rushing towards it, right? And
Yeah.
frankly, Eunice, if it democratizes, if it gets great voices speaking for it, I'd be delighted to be off the hook. I would be delighted. I'm sitting in my office. I run a property
Yeah.
company. I'd be delighted just to run my property company. The only reason I'm in politics is because I really genuinely fear for the existence of our country. I think we are being torn apart constitutionally, culturally, democratically. There's a massive deficit. Economically, we're being seriously damaged by what's going on. All these policies, these woke policies,
Yeah.
economically very damaging, culturally very damaging, economically very damaging. So I'm only
Yeah.
on the battlefield because I really fear for the country. If Nigel can deliver, if he can do what he needs to do, great, I'm off. and I'll go back to my little life and go back into the undergrowth.
Yeah, but the only advice I can give to the Reform Party and Nigel Farage is that, like how Trump won the election in America, he had a team of people, charismatic, entrepreneurial, smart people around him, like, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, all these people, RFK
Yeah.
Jr., Tulsi Gabbard. And I feel like if the Reform Party has any chance of winning the 2029 election, or it could be even sooner than that. There could be a slap
I
election,
absolutely.
because the Keir Starmer uh, premiership has been such a catastrophic failure that I actually see the election happening sooner. So I feel like the Reform Party, they need to get their act together, and Nigel Farage can't do it by himself. So I really hope that if there is any bad blood or if there is any misunderstanding, you and Nigel come to terms, because as you said, I want the country to prosper, and I see reform as the only alternative to the Labour government, because I don't really see the Conservatives doing anything. As a matter of fact, I feel like the Conservatives are done. And now we have a situation in which the vote on the right is split. Half the people vote for the Conservative, the other half vote for reform. So what do you think is going to happen on that front? If let's say we go to like 5 years forward, 2020 and 29, do you think that the Reform Party can win the election outright, or do you think they have to make a deal with the Conservatives?
I think the Reform Party needs to behave and act and plan and execute as if it's going to win the election outright. It has to
Yeah,
go for a victory. If you don't go for the victory, you'll never get it. If you're kind of mucking around in the shallows of the pond, trying to just, not get yourself a little too wet, you just want to do a little bit, you will never succeed. If you want to succeed, you've got to throw yourself into it 100%. Absolutely take the fight to the Conservative Party. And that's not an aggressive thing. That's
yeah,
making sure that reform is fighting fit. It has everything it needs to mount a
yeah,
fantastic general election campaign. That's a matter of fantastic candidates. It's a matter of fantastic policies. It's a matter of fantastic spokespeople. And it's
yeah,
and obviously raising money and bringing it all together so that when it comes to the general election, you go boom, and you know which constituencies you're going to really tackle. We came second in 98 constituencies, and we did
yeah,
that election on a shoestring. Can you
yeah,
imagine what we would be like if we got our act together? We've got to do it. And as I say, that Nigel, look, we've made promises to the people. We have created aspirations and we've created hopes. We, the leadership of which I was part when we created these aspirations and hopes, are obliged to the people to do it. This isn't just about Nigel, please do it. Actually, Nigel, you're obliged to do it. Richard, you're obliged to do it. Ben Habib, you're obliged to put pressure on them until they do it. You know,
yeah,
that's how I see it. I have a solemn view of the obligations people like me have. When you get up and you make a case for something and you fight that fight, then you are obliged to fight it through to the end. You cannot be mercurial. You cannot be here one day, gone the next. You've got to stay the course and you've got to deliver. And so that's what I say to Richard and Nigel. You made the promises, you created the aspirations, now deliver.
exactly. And exactly how Trump done it in America, because we remember like 4 years ago, everyone thought he was out and out after January 6th and all of that. And, he went through the whole prosecution, but he kept fighting. But then again, one of the main things that I think led Trump to victory was a team he built around him, people like Elon Musk and so forth. And I feel like Nigel, as you said, he needs to go for the kill, but he also needs a good group of diverse people from all kinds of backgrounds that will help him. And I feel like your voice is very, very much needed in the party. So let me just ask you about Donald Trump. What do you
Yeah.
think of him? What do you think will happen in the next 4 years?
So it's interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, what I've tried to do in the first segment of this interview, Eunice, is to differentiate between the purpose that we're all serving and the
yeah,
individuals concerned. It's not about Nigel and me; it's about what we do and how we do it. And it's the same. I see the whole Trump thing in the same way. Everyone goes, "Oh God, he can't speak. He's inarticulate. He's a misogynist. He's a racist. He's that. He's that. Blah blah blah." I'm not interested in the man that is Trump. What I'm interested in, particularly as a British citizen, is what is the Trump presidency going to mean for the United States and the United Kingdom? And what I hope is if Trump delivers on what he's promised, which is again a United States that makes policies for the US, strong borders, deregulate, ditch the stupid net zero, cut taxes, promote the working classes of the United States of America, strong on defense, strong on law and order, get that genie back in the bottle. You know, the Pandora's box on criminality is open both in the US and the UK. If he can
Yeah.
deliver that agenda, then the UK is under real pressure to similarly deliver. Because of the narrative at the moment, Eunice, as we all know, is
Yeah.
right across Western civilization, the Western world, is borders don't matter. Libertarianism is much more important than democracy. International law is more important than domestic law. You know, we've got to
Which is
make rules.
ridiculous.
Yeah, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's the
Yeah.
kind of malaise we're in, that a minority should be given positive discrimination. You know, the whole Western world at the moment is being governed by effectively globalist ideals, subjugating the interests of nation states, doing away with nation states. And Trump is firmly put his foot on, stamped his foot down and said, no, we're going to go back to the nation state of the United States. And if the UK wishes to stay competitive, economically speaking, and if it wishes to compete with the US, because let me tell you, we're going to have to compete with the US. It's not going to be plain sailing just because he likes
Yeah.
us. We're going to
He
have to
doesn't
do the
like
same
us
as
though,
him.
actually. But yeah, this is what I
What?
was gonna say. I was gonna say that yeah, Trump likes the United Kingdom, and so does Elon Musk actually. But unfortunately, we have a government now, Keir Starmer, in which they have put themselves at odds with Trump because obviously Keir Starmer sent hundreds of people over to America to campaign on Kamala Harris's behalf. We have David Lammy that has always lambasted Trump, and we have Sadiq Khan. So, and you know what Trump is like. He could be an egomaniac
Yeah,
sometimes. And, you don't want to get on his wrong side. And
yeah.
unfortunately, now we have a situation where we can benefit very highly from that special transatlantic relationship. But because of the government we have now, this Labour government, we probably can't. But then again, it goes back to my other point that reform. I see reform as the only hope because he's got a special relationship with Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage was there over in Mar-a-Lago. He's already said he's probably not going to speak with David Lammy. Do you think that Nigel and reform can be a link to America in the next 4 years? And do you think they will do
Well,
anything, or do you think that Labour has to do?
I think it would be a mistake for Nigel to become a link for the Labour Party to Trump, because what
Yeah,
he would do I know he's offered it, but and if they were to accept, what he would do is take the pressure off the Labour Party. What we
yeah,
need is maximum pressure on the Labour Party to do the right thing. That's not going to happen if they've got Farage working for them.
yeah. But then,
Are
how
you
can
with
they do
me?
that though? How can they do that? Like for example, in terms of
They have
energy,
to. They have to
Trump.
bend. They have to
Yeah,
bend. They
yeah,
have to bend. Trump needs to put pressure on them and they have to bend. They have to recognize that if they don't deregulate and cut taxes in the UK, capital will leave the UK and
yeah,
go and get invested in the US because it'll be a better home for capital. You know, everyone goes on about this US trade deal. Ultimately, it's not about having a trade deal. It's about having products the Americans wish to buy and us having, and Americans producing products we wish to buy. But if we become over-regulated and overly taxed compared to the US
yeah.
will start producing stuff domestically. They won't buy our stuff because it'll be too expensive. And so forget about the trade deal until you've got your own house in order. And that's where we should be bringing maximum pressure on the Labour government. We've got to ditch this net zero nonsense. We've got to
Yeah.
ditch all these laws, these new employment laws that make it so hard to make money. The new regulations that they're putting in on diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're taking that to even another level beyond it. We've
Which
got
is
to go back to
ridiculous, I think.
It's ridiculous. We've got to
Yeah,
go back to meritocracy. We've got to cut taxes on the working class, cut taxes on SMEs, get rid of business rates. You know, all this stuff. We need to liberate the economy. You will not grow by putting your knee on the neck of the economy, which is what Rachel Reeves and Starmer are doing. And that will only be revealed if no one gives any protection to the Labour Party. We mustn't protect the Labour Party. We must expose them for what they are. So Nigel mustn't protect the Labour Party. He mustn't
yeah,
act as their envoy because it'll make the pain of the
yeah.
United Kingdom worse.
Yeah, because then again, even if they do make a deal, Labour government's probably going to take the credit for it, even though it was Nigel long
Absolutely.
before. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
and the bad habit gets embedded.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Are you with? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, this is the thing I was going to say, because I feel like this Labour government has been such a failure already. They've only been in power for like 3 or 4 months now. And obviously, we had the farmers' protest, which I think you were there as well.
Yeah,
And the whole economy, we had energy spikes, their whole net zero madness that they have going on. Energy prices are going up, inflation is going up, rent is going up. And at the same time, they're taxing people even more. And I just don't seem to understand what is their end goal here, because I don't think it's benefiting anyone. Even as you said, the more you raise taxes on the rich are just going to leave. And now, as I
absolutely.
said, the UK, or London at least, I've been living in London all my life. And London is just not the same as it used to be, like even 5 years ago. And I feel like London is going downhill, and everyone else is moving either to Dubai or to Miami, or the people are not staying in London. And I think one of the cornerstone of a healthy society is when rich people want to come to your society and invest their money in your society.
Absolutely.
So what do you think is going to happen with this Labour government? Do you think they're going to implode? Do you think there's going to be a snap election? What do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years?
Well, in the last week or two,
Yeah,
the dollar has gone from
yeah,
131 against the pound to 125. Now,
yeah,
that's a sign that international investors are already leaving the United Kingdom. We know that 9,500 millionaires have left the country this year so far.
yeah,
We know that there's an exodus of talent going on. And the Labour Party, none of the front bench have ever been in business. They don't know what it takes to make money.
exactly. You can tell that
You
from their
know,
economic policy. Yeah,
yeah. And they actually hate wealth creation. What they want is wealth redistribution. They want the
yeah,
electorate dependent on the state so they can command their votes. But that's not how you get prosperity for the country. And without prosperity for the country, eventually we'll be going off cap in hand to the IMF, begging them for a loan, which may be
mm,
what Starmer wants, because the IMF will then force us back into the arms of the European Union. you know,
yeah.
this is not going to end well the way Starmer's
But
going.
the thing is, look, this is the thing. I see Keir Starmer and his whole cabinet as corrupt crony politicians, career politicians that have no experience in business. And I don't think they're even here to serve the interest of the British people. They're here to serve the interest of the globalists and WEF and organizations like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And the absolute blooming globalists,
Yeah,
libertarian
yeah, yeah.
nutcases and globalists. Yeah,
And I think we turned the page with Donald Trump being elected in America, because Donald Trump being elected, it was basically a two middle fingers to this whole globalist movement, to this whole woke
absolutely.
ideology. But then, unfortunately, now we have a situation in which most of Europe is more left leaning governments. If you look at the UK, if you look at France, Germany, but the transition is there. You can tell that people are tired, and
The
people want
movements
to
are
move.
rising everywhere, aren't they, Eunice?
Yeah.
In
Uh,
France, in the
yeah, and I
Netherlands, in
hope.
Austria.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it started back in 2016 with Trump and with Brexit. But then again, they always talk about, democracy. And it was the EU that stalled Brexit negotiations. They're the ones that made it difficult for us to make Brexit happen. They're the ones that
Absolutely.
made it bit difficult for Trump. So they try to pretend the other side is far right and extremist and anti democratic. But in reality, they are the ones that are anti democratic, and they can't. But now I have a lot of hope, because Trump won the House, he's won the Senate, he's won the presidency, also the popular vote. But I just feel like this is going to be a missed opportunity for the UK, because we can really make things happen in the next 4 years. But then when we have Labour in power for the next 5 years, then it's going to be a conflict of interest, and I just don't know where
Yeah.
it goes unless JD Vance becomes the next president, and I see JD Vance becoming the next president of the United. So I think one of the best ways for us and Reform Party, we need to be on our tiptoes, because I feel like this Labour
Absolutely.
government is going to implode. I don't
Yeah.
just look at the last 3 months. Look at all the things that happened in the last 3 months. The whole two-tier policing, the farmers' protest, and also what happened with freedom of speech. People are being sent to jail now because of an opinion
Yeah.
online, and then we're emptying out our prisons of pedophiles and serial killers. Some people that reoffended on the same day they were released from prison, just to put people
It's
in prison because of an ex
unbelievable.
post. So, what's your opinion on that? Again, this Labour government, we talked about the economics. What do you think about the fact of what they're doing socially? They're trying to erode freedom of speech. They're trying to bring in laws such as Islamophobia laws. So, in an essence, you can't really say anything, even if you back it up by facts. without them labeling you a racist, sexist, fascist, whatever. So what do you think of that? And what do you think of the fact that they try to summon Elon Musk to the parliament?
Yeah, so I mean, I completely agree with everything you said, and
Yeah,
the British people on the whole, there's nothing we like more in life than to form a queue. We're quite timid as a country. We don't
yeah,
want to be aggressive, and I'm pleased with that because we don't want to be like the French. The French farmers get upset. Paris is set ablaze. I don't want that. I want our country to be a settled, peaceable, prosperous country. But at some point, Eunice, at some point, things will break if the Labour Party doesn't get its act together. And you saw a bit of that after the Southport riots. And instead of
mm,
reacting to the legitimate concerns of many of the protesters, I'm not talking about the violent rioters, but many of the legitimate protesters, instead of reacting to their legitimate concern over mass immigration, the Prime Minister castigated all of them as far right activists and directed the criminal justice system to arrest them. And
yeah,
you can have that kind of pressure from the top to try and crush any opposition, but at some point that pressure cooker will burst, and he needs to be very, very careful. He's not very popular. The Labour Party is not very popular.
yeah.
They
Their
got
popularity
fewer
has
votes.
collapsed. Yeah,
Yeah, and they got fewer votes in the last election than they did in 2019, when Corbyn was in charge. So
mm,
people I speak to say, oh, Ben, they've got a massive majority. We won't be able to shift them before 2029. But I think it's not impossible for a series of events to come together. Mass unrest, disappointment in the government, coupled by a collapsing economy, where people just absolutely demand an election. And then let's hope we get a better government.
yeah, definitely. But also, I just feel like the elections in this country are a bit, what's the word? I would say unfair. I don't want to say rigged because I don't believe in the first past the post system. Because how can you get 4 million votes, 4.1 million votes as a Reform Party? I only have 5 seats, and Labour only got 1/3 of the votes, yet they got 2/3 of the seats in the parliament. And that
Seats.
just doesn't make sense to me
Yeah.
mathematically. So do you think there's
They
something, I
got
mean,
only
is
they got only 2.5 times what we got. Less than 2.5 times. They got two and a bit, 2.1 times the votes Reform got, and they got
exactly.
a landslide majority.
Yeah, but then this is the point I'm making. As a matter of fact, I feel like the country is either center or center right. I don't think the country is center left or far left as this
Oh,
government
I
is.
totally agree with you. Totally
Yeah.
agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you add up the conservative vote and the reform vote and some other parties, we actually have more than Labour. And to be honest, Lib Dems, I don't even know what they stand for. Like if someone asks me, like if I
No,
asked you, what do you think Lib Dem stands for? I don't really know. Because they're
they
just a
don't know
party
what
that
they
just sits
stand
on the
for.
fence on everything. So you can't
Yeah.
really call them left leaning Lib Dems. It's just, a
No.
centrist party. Um, so Ben, the last question I'm going to ask you, where do you see yourself in your political career in the next 5 years? Do you think you will have some sort of a voice, some sort of a position within the Reform Party, or are you just happy to let it go and let Nigel do the job?
I don't know. I mean, to me,
Yeah.
as I say, Eunice, it's academic. What I want is for the country to be saved. If Kemi wakes up one morning and recognizes, as perhaps she already does, that the country needs saving and
Yeah.
she moves towards doing it, great. Let Kemi do it. I'm not party political. It's a
Mm.
point I made to Richard before I joined Reform. I said, I'm not really party political. I'm in this for the country. I'm only in it for the country. Now, if that's through Reform, great. If it's through the Conservative Party, unlikely for all the reasons we all know. The Conservative Party seems to be more Liberal Democrat than it is nationalist. But if they can get their act together, great. If it's some new party led by the great and good of our movement, great. I don't care. Let's get it done, though.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Ben, I always said this. I think it's very important for people like us, people from an ethnic background that are patriotic and they stand up for the values of the country that they moved to, but also the country that they grew up in. And we don't play identity politics. You're not like Sadiq Khan, for example, and I try not to be either. I just feel like you should criticize bad ideas in society without being called an Islamophobe or a racist or a sexist, and don't put
Absolutely.
yourself in a category or a box. Don't play identity politics. And that's why I feel like your voice has a very much more weight than if a white person says it, because you're from an ethnic background yourself. And I actually rather like Zia Youssef as well, the current chairman of the Reform Party. What's your opinions on Zia Yusuf, by the way, before we go?
I've only shaken his hand once. I haven't spoken
Yeah.
to him at any length, but his public appearances are very capable. He speaks extremely well.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think it's important for people with our background to come and, say the truth. So because if a white man says it, people think, oh, you're a racist, you're a bigot, this and that. But when we say it, people are like, no, maybe we should listen because we're on the side of
Yeah.
the truth. Ben Habib, thank you very much for coming on
Thank you,
again. It was a
Eunice.
pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers.